My name is Taniya Spisbah and I'm the Director of the Australia-India Institute here in Delhi. And as Syed has generously introduced me, you would hope by my age I've also got a past. So I was previously a diplomat with the Australian government. Before that I was a lawyer, and before that I was a research assistant at various universities in the United States, in Italy and in Australia, back when I was around 19, 20, 21. So, my first question to you all, who in the room has a CV? Okay, interesting. Half of you. All right, that's a really good place to start. All right, so we've got about an hour or so together. I'm going to give you a presentation, but I also want it to be a little bit interactive, so feel free to ask anything along the way, or even test assumptions. If you don't quite agree with something, put your hand up and we can also address that. But my first question is, and I just want a couple of answers, what's the purpose of a CV? What's that?
To introduce yourself.
To introduce yourself? Anyone else? So Syed kind of said it in his opening. He was talking about trying to land your first interview. So certainly introducing yourself is part of it. But basically, when you think about trying to land an interview, in a way, it's like fishing, right? So this is your bait. This is how you're trying to attract your first interview. And it doesn't mean you'll necessarily land the job, but what you're really trying to do is land the interview. And this is quite key, because then there are a few things we need to be able to communicate when we do this. Now, in my view, and I think most people would agree, you would usually need two CVs. You'll have your generic CV. So this is something that, as you said, to introduce yourself, is something where you'll need to have a list of characteristics, and then I'll talk about a specific CV in a moment. So a generic CV needs to be able to communicate several things. First of all, you need to be able to say what you're interested in. And this will be your academic interest if it's an academic CV, or your professional interest if it's a professional or employment CV. You will need to demonstrate the experience that you have that demonstrates these skills. And your experience will be varied at this point. So can I ask, who in the room already either has a job or has undertaken some kind of employment? Anyone? Yeah, great. All right, and if I may, feel free not to answer, but can I ask, what is it that you did or do?
I was a sales agent with Teleperformance. I had to do sales over there, so I worked there approximately for 9 months. And I also had a job with the consultants.
Fantastic. And what are you studying?
Mass communication.
Okay, and then I think you have a job as well?
I was in Cooling Limited, Noida. It was a telecom-based TPO, international one.
Okay, and what is it you're studying?
I am currently pursuing BBA.
Sorry?
Currently pursuing BBA.
Okay.
Last semester.
Okay, wonderful. So you're quite lucky because your jobs are also in the area that you're studying. That's not always the case. So sometimes we need to be a little bit creative, because our part-time job might actually be something that helps us earn money while we're studying, but it might not be relevant to our future employment. So we might need to also think about how we capture those skills as well. Then you have your education. So obviously all of you are currently studying, and that is something that you'll definitely want to communicate, your interest there. And then finally, you might have skills that aren't related to work, but can be applied to your work setting. So for example, if some of you in the room want to go for your first job, but you've never actually had a job before, you'll need to think a little bit creatively about your life experience, things that you'll be able to communicate that show that you'll be good in the workplace, even if you haven't yet had a job. So that might be, for example, if you've undertaken sport, you can demonstrate that you're a good team player. You might have done some mentorship or coaching of other students. There's always something that you can point to. So always sort of reflect back and think, what are the skills and attributes, and how can I communicate that? Yes, up the back.
Hi. So I was a graphic designer before, but I'd like to change my field of work in the future. So all my experiences in the past, job experiences, have been in graphic
So that is an excellent question, and it's one that I will get to when we talk at the end of this session, because I'm going to go through what should be in a CV, and I'm going to answer exactly this, because my career has also changed, right? I started as a lawyer, and then I moved from lawyer to civil servant to diplomat, and now I'm in academia. So the trick is not to confuse the employer, but rather to demonstrate the consistency. And there'll always be a consistency, because ultimately we're still the same person, right? So looking back, the trick is to be able to draw a line or a narrative through your experience that clearly communicates what you're wanting to do. And Syed said that at the beginning in his introduction as well, that someone was able to clearly communicate their past experience, where they're moving, what they want from the current role, what they will be able to offer in that current role, and then let's have a conversation about whether or not that fits. So the reason I've talked about a generic CV is sometimes you want to just have a document ready that captures all your experience, and this also will help you. So part of it is distilling for communication to someone else, but part of it is also about distilling in your own mind, what are the skills that I have, and becoming conscious. That's not actually that easy a task. If I ask you, why are you amazing? Is that an easy question to answer? Or do you get a bit self-conscious? Do you think, oh God, I don't want to show off or anything? You know, that's a really hard thing to get your head around. But your CV is actually meant to position not why you're the most amazing person, but certainly why you are credibly and authentically the best fit for a job. Now, your generic CV won't be able to demonstrate why you're the best fit for a job, obviously, because it's generic. So what this is doing is really helping you identify, what are my skill sets? It forces you to be disciplined. What am I really interested in? And then hone that message. That's the point here. We then move on to the specific CV. This one takes a bit more effort, because once you've kind of recaptured what it is that you're good at or what you want to do, you also need to be able to then tailor it for a specific position. And now to the question up the back, switching from graphic design to something else, that's part of it. But the thing is, when you're first leaving university, there might be 10 different jobs you want to do, right? You might not know. You think, my God, maybe I want to go to Goa, let's see what's there. Can my mass communication skills take me there? Maybe there's an environmental journalist position, and then I get to live at the beach. I'm going to go for that job. But, you know, there's another job in Bangalore that focuses on cutting edge IT, and maybe I'm 23, I really want to focus on establishing my career in the absolute innovation hub of India. Or, you know, there's so many different ways in which you could go. So I think it's important to realize the job that gets you the environmental journalist degree, or the CV that gets you that degree, is not the same CV that's going to get you the cutting edge technology Bangalore job, right? So we need to start tailoring. So this is where you need to closely read a job description. And I'm going to take you through what a job description might look like as well. But you need to read a job description, and then what will you do with that information? You read a job description, you have your CV, what's your first step?
Check your skills according to the job.
Okay, check your skills according to the job's a good place to start. You might also want to then change your CV by picking out keywords from that job description and think, okay, you know, I've already written that I'm interested in mass communications. I've already written that I'm interested in this and that. But this job is specifically talking about, you know, tailoring the message to students, or tailoring the message to the public, or tailoring the message to, you know, whoever it may be. It could be a communications lobbying job to government. So you will start to pick up these words and tweak your CV, right? It will still be authentic and true. It will still be the same message, but you're going to start a kind of active listening and think, I'm now speaking to a specific targeted audience, and I need my CV to talk to this person. So that same CV, you're just going to start tweaking that message. But the job description isn't the whole story. So when you're preparing your specific CV, you're also going to look at the employer, right? So who is the company? You might want to start looking at how many people does that company employ? Is that company based in Delhi? Is it national? Is it international? Does it employ 3 people, 300, 3,000, or 3 million around the world? Sorry? Salary, did you say?
Yep.
So salary is part of it, but right now, salary will decide for you whether or not you want the job. This part is about tweaking your CV to think, what is the position really? So there'll be a position description, but to understand the context of that position, you'll need to know, where is that company located? What is that company's ethos? Who do they employ? Are they a diverse employer? Do they employ a particular demographic? Do you even want to work there once you've done all this research? You might think, my God, it's 90% men. They don't, go in for diversity. The median age of employers is 45. I don't really want to work there. Or you might think, gosh, this is dynamic. It's up and coming. It was a startup 5 years ago. It's going from strength to strength. I really want to work there. And then you'll pitch yourself accordingly. So the specific CV needs to speak to that employer's ethic. There'll always be a website page that says about us. And normally the about us will tell you what we stand for, what we do, what this company is trying to achieve. And I think you need to understand as well that when you're preparing for a job interview, it's actually a two-way street, right? If you think about making friends, you're not going to make a friend with someone you really don't like, I hope. I hope you'll all be authentic people. So generally, if you meet someone and you really like them, you'll establish a friendship. And if you don't, you'll think, oh, it just wasn't for me. Jobs are the same. So when you're preparing for an interview, yes, put your best foot forward, but don't lie about who you are. Don't pretend that your ethic is the same if it's not. Because then even if you get the job, you may not actually want to be there and you may not be happy there, right? So authenticity is really important in a CV, and particularly your specific CV. So when you're introducing yourself, you want to say, well, this is me, this is who I am. Yes, I'm flexible, but I'm also, I'm needing this kind of workplace. And you need to be wanting to be in that workplace. Okay, so now we're going to get on to how to structure a CV. So the first 2 bits are more about what your CV communicates, and then the last 3 bits about what goes into a CV. So Syed covered this a little bit in the beginning as well. What you convey is your presentation and writing skills. So as Syed said, if you have 10 grammatical mistakes in the very beginning cover letter of your message, no one's going to want to employ a communications so-called expert that has mistakes in their cover mail, right? So it's really important that you realize that while you're introducing yourself by content, you're also introducing yourself by format and by the judgments you make. So many of you in the room will have had an array of experiences already, but you need to make a judgment about how many of those experiences go into your CV. And so to that graphic design question as well, you may have, say 10 years of experience or 5 different jobs in graphic design. You may just want to tease out 2 of them to highlight your background, but you don't want to confuse the employer that all your experience is one thing and now you want to do something completely different. You want to lead your employer that you have skills that are transferable. So you need to make a judgment call about what goes in. And it won't be necessarily absolutely everything, because sometimes everything's confusing. If you're going for, say, a NGO job in Delhi here, and you happen to speak, I don't know, Brazilian Portuguese and Swahili, do you think these are relevant skills to include in a short 2-page CV? It might be interesting about you, but if there are too many distracting things, it will actually start to confuse the employer, right? So the best way to think about what to put in a CV, and this in a way goes back to Syed's point about the car park, you need to flip your view after you think about, I want to introduce myself. The flip side is, if I were the interviewer, what do I want to know? And you can actually explore this mental state by interviewing with friends or family. So if you're not really sure about what the employer wants, sometimes it's very difficult because you're in the headspace of what I want to communicate. So instead, just flip it and ask a friend, okay, instead of me preparing by being the interviewee, I'm going to prepare by interviewing you, you know? And then as the employer or the interviewer, think about how your perspective changes when your friend answers the question, and you might think, oh, that wasn't that relevant, that doesn't impress me, that was very good. That will help you prepare. So find a way to reverse that lens. So then we get to just the really basic building blocks, and I'm sure you'll all know this. Plus, if you Google online, you know, CV Builder, you will find these sorts of tools for help online. But basically, you'll need your personal contact information. This sounds really easy, but it might not be. So for example, I'm from Australia. I was applying for this job in India, and I was just shifting my home from Sydney back to Canberra in Australia. So when it comes to contact information, I can't give a physical address because I'm actually sort of moving between places. I was traveling and I was wanting to end up in India, so it doesn't really make sense to put my physical address. So for me, I put my Gmail account and I put my phone number. And that way I know I'm contactable. Because whatever you put, you need to be contactable. So if you have a physical address, that's great. Most of you will. If you don't worry about it. Just communicate the best way that allows you to be contactable. Everything should be in descending order. So you always start with your most recent work experience, moving back to the past. And then that's followed by your education, also in descending order. And then I'll show you a very quick example, but in my view, to help the interviewer, you should start with a little box of summary about your skills as well. How long should a CV be? Does anyone have an idea? It can be a little bit longer, but yes, we should always be thinking in terms of who is going to read this and how much time are they going to spend on it. So I've been on a number of different interview panels in different jobs. Someone sent a 35-page document and attached 3 articles they wrote, and I just didn't even look at it. I saw it was this big and I just went next. Because that person exercises no judgment. Even if everything in there was excellent, I don't have time to read that. That's almost arrogant. So don't waste people's time, you know. I think 2 pages is okay. It may go a little bit longer, but no more than 2 pages. If you can't put something into 3 pages max, I don't think it's going to be read. So then we'll move on to the relevant information. And then we'll also look at what kind of interests you want to convey and look into tailoring your message as well. Okay, so what's relevant? So this one says, it says on your resume that you were created in God's image. This guy was clearly very impressed. I'm not sure that's relevant to most jobs. So obviously we need to make some judgment calls about what should go in. And I think for me, the number one test is, would you employ the person that you're describing? So definitely, you know, write what you think is good, but then when you read it back, you think, is this someone I would employ? Give yourself that test. But it just might be relevant. So this didn't capture very well, but this is someone that's being interviewed for being a bouncer, you know, in the front of a bar. And so his CV says, I've broken 15 bones, I put 15 guys in the hospital, I've done 17 black eyes, and I've broken 5 bones, I've 32 concussions and 10 blood noses. Wow, this guy's clearly impressed, right? Because that sounds like a terrible CV, but it's actually very good for this particular job. So what you're trying to do might actually change depending on who you're trying to be employed by. I hope no one's going for this kind of job, but you know what to put in if you are. And then we spoke about format. So this one says, I want my resume to be the one that you remember. It's also available as a music video and an interpretive dance, and in haiku, which is a form of poem. So that is certainly interesting, and I have to confess to you, once there was an application for a job that I had advertised, and the person gave me a 2-page list. It was for international research position. They wrote 2 pages of poetry, and it all rhymed, and it was very expressive, and out of mere curiosity I actually wanted to interview this person, but I didn't have the time, because I thought, while that's very interesting, it doesn't really convey to me that you understood the point and that you exercise judgment. So I think it's important to realize that your CV should actually be more content heavy and less really on colourful format. Yes, you want to stand out, but honestly, you can stand out just from your summary. It should actually be simple and formulaic. If your summary content is good enough and you get to your first interview, you can stand out by who you are. I think that's the point at which you really want to be authentic, original, and different. But on a CV, if you're too creative, unless it's something like graphic design and you really want to stand out with your skills, that's a very different thing. It really depends what you're going for. But unless you're communicating relevant skills to the position, keep it simple. Keep it very simple. So as I mentioned before, there's generic CVs and then there are specific CVs. For the specific CVs, you'll need to be doing preparation. So as I said before, we'll need to read the job description and then also read about the company or organisation. I talked about going to the website, but another important thing to round out this is also to go to the news. It could be that that company has merged with another company recently. They might have done something really great, so that when you're going for the interview, you could say, oh, and I'm aware that you just won the award for blah, blah, blah recently. You could realise they just got into legal trouble and you might think, gosh, do I want to work with that organisation? There are a number of things. They could have had a change of CEO, and during the interview, you could demonstrate your knowledge of recent events for that company. Now, I don't expect you to read this. That's not the point of this exercise. What I want to do now is just take you through what a position summary might look like. So in India, it could be a bit different. In Australia, a position summary will normally tell you several different things. So here, this is actually the job that I'm in now. This is about the Australia-India Institute and the director position. So it's telling me what they're looking for and what the director will do. Then it's going to talk about key responsibilities, and there are different areas. So this particular job is talking about research and academic leadership. Then there's a separate bit on engagement and advocacy, and then there's a third bit on service and leadership. So I already know that when I'm going to tailor my CV from the generic CV to the specific CV for this one, this specific CV is going to now have tones of research and academic leadership, engagement and advocacy. So in my previous jobs, certainly as a diplomat, I've done a lot of engagement and advocacy, but I might not have structured it that way in my generic CV. But now I know to package my information using these keywords, still using my relevant work experience, so it's still all true and relevant, but it's packaged in a way that helps the employer realize that my experience is very relevant to the position. Then, after that, there'll also be something about selection criteria. So the selection criteria is something that they're going to judge you on, and your CV will not answer these questions. You'll need to write a separate document that addresses selection criteria. But what it will do is communicate some of these things. So they want someone who has a PhD or relevant. So if I don't have a PhD, I want to be demonstrating a lot of relevant experience in my CV. Someone with a strong interest in India, so all my India relevant experience will be starting to move up to the front of my CV. So when I do my skills summary, I'll want to put the focus on things that match the selection criteria, right? Then there's usually always an essential component and a desirable component. Essential means without these things, you will not get the job. And you need to address all of them. If not in your CV, then separately in a position description. If you don't, you will not perform strongly for interview selection. For desirable, you don't have to address all of these, but if you can address some of them, that's obviously an advantage. And so here I've put up a bit of a sample CV, and the idea is, again, not to be able to read it closely, but just to understand the structure. So right up front, I've put qualities, and I've made it very simple for the interviewer or the person reading it. So you don't have to read lots of paragraphs, just in a few short dot points, you will understand the qualities that I have as a person or as a contender. So you can start to move through those dot points and think, is this person relevant for the job? If you like what you see, then you can move into the summary of skills. So in the summary of skills, I use a keyword, usually a word that's come out from the position summary, and then I explain my relevant skills against that. So really in the first page, you already know I'm good for the job. And then I go on to do my CV. Right? So a specific CV should already have communicated without having to go through all my history. Right up front, I've made it very easy for the selector or the interviewer that I'm relevant already. And then here comes my history. So currently I'm the director of the Australia-India Institute. Before that, I was the head of international at another major university, UNSW. Before that, I spent time at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade for 10 years as a diplomat. And before that, I was a lawyer. And that's all very clear. Then you have my academic qualifications, and then some of the history of presentations I've done, international studies, etc. So that should all be nice and clear for the person interviewing. I've put up some little case study here of what I don't think works well. So this person is a very, very dynamic person and has a lot of skills. And I'll read it out because I know it's very difficult to read there. But this person has software skills in Microsoft Project, Photoshop, InDesign, basically interior design software. This person has also been a lecturer at a university. They have a license to drive a car, a trailer, and a boat. They've also got renovation experience. They've got Airbnb experience because they hired out their Airbnb apartment for a little while. And they also did shelving in a supermarket, as well as lecturing in a university. So, and they founded an architectural company. So this person has done a lot of things. But if you were picking up this CV, what job are they specific for? Right? So you really need to think, okay, this person's quite dynamic. And if you met them at a party, you'd think, wow, you drive a boat and you're a lecturer and you're an architect, you know? And I think at one point, also speaks Arabic and French. So a really great person to meet at a party, but not the best things to communicate in a CV. So that's kind of all I wanted to take you through on CVs. We'll then have a talk about what to put in, and I can tell you some of my personal experiences as well. But there's much more to a CV these days. And Syed mentioned this a bit at the beginning as well when he spoke about social media. So social media can be your friend as well as something to be wary about. So when I said we need a generic CV and a specific CV, your generic CV belongs on LinkedIn. If you're ready for your professional career and you want to have a job, you actually need a network, and you need people to start knowing who you are, what you want to do, and get people known. So particularly for the graphic design question person, if you're wanting to change career, the best thing you can do is to start on LinkedIn to build a little bit of a profile about your new direction and to start developing a reputation in your new chosen field. And it could be that on LinkedIn, under your CV, you start either posting relevant things or even writing very short articles, 600-word articles of your own that you just put on LinkedIn on your new chosen field, and just start to build up a bit of interest in what you're doing in your new chosen field. So LinkedIn is a very good way to say generically, this is what I do. And then obviously specifically you'll need to target for the job you want. Reputation is key at any age, at any stage. So if you're 19 or 20 or just starting out and you're at university, start with your lecturers and your professors. Be the student who always gets their things in on time. And when it comes to needing a referee, because everyone needs a reference, you'll need a reference to go on and do a master's. You'll need a reference if you want to apply for a PhD. You'll need a reference if you're going for a job. Start thinking about who can support you and who's credible. So Syed spoke about mentorship. That's important for skills and learning and development. But you also need someone who's going to endorse you. So mentorship's one thing, endorsement is another. And your reference is an endorsement. Your reputation is what you need to get endorsed. Okay? So start thinking about that even now. And then we spoke about some of the other documents in the course of this discussion, which is addressing selection criteria. And as Syed had mentioned as well, a cover letter. So when you're applying for a job, you'll need to write a cover letter. And the content of that should be why you're interested in that job, not why you're interested in a job. So I've seen on LinkedIn and other examples, people start with seeking opportunities. To me, that means unemployed. I'm not really interested in someone who's seeking opportunities. I'm interested in someone who says passionate about X or experienced in blah, keen to make impact in whatever. So that means you could still not have a current job, but keen to have impact or keen to contribute to demonstrates an active interest in a specific area, specific path, specific direction. Seeking opportunities sounds like, I don't know, to me it doesn't sound very directional. So again, Syed covered this point a little bit, but this is where social media is not necessarily your friend, and you need to be a little bit more conscious. So you've got Kermit there with his most recent post saying, "Fuck the system." So if you have something like that on Facebook and you're going for a really specific job, this may not be your best friend, right? So just think about everything, and you don't need to be truly, you need to make sure that you have relevant self-expression. Obviously, you can't treat your whole life like it's a CV or a job interview. You can't self-censor everywhere. But I think you need to be conscious that whatever you communicate online is there to stay, like me just now. So really be aware of that and really think about, does this serve me? And is it even what I truly believe? And then here's another example. You know, we've used data from the internet to see what you've been up to lately, and that's tanked the interview for whatever reason. And then, as I said before, someone has to read it. So do not do a 10 or 20 page thing. Make sure it's concise. Make sure that it's relevant. And, you know, ask your friends or family, could you please read this? Is it good enough? Is this someone you would want to employ? And as I said, I really think it's critical. When you go for interview preparation, don't always think about, am I being the best interviewee? Flip it and role play the interviewer, and see how impressed you are by your friend or brother or sister when they're answering questions and whether or not you would employ them. So that's it for the official part of it from me. But there were some really good questions up the back, and I'd love these questions to continue. So now's your chance to just interact and ask anything you want. Yeah.
So yeah, basically I'll introduce myself first. I'm a student of English literature, and I'm a poet at the same time a storyteller.
Okay.
You gave an example of this person who had sent you his CV in the form of a poem.
Yes.
But from past maybe some 30 minutes, I'm thinking like, you know, after hearing all this, what's my cost?
Mm-hmm.
Seriously, I mean, then I frame the question for you. For a person like who belongs to humanities, who is passionate about stories, about characters, loud, about so basically the aesthetic part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that writing a CV for such a person is a postmodern capitalist way of putting a price tag on your own self?
I mean, this is an interesting question, and it's getting us out of how to write a CV and into do we need a CV, and I'm very happy to answer. This is the philosophy of how we express ourselves and whether or not a CV is the only way to do so. So I think it comes down to, are you applying for a job? And if so, what kind of job is it? So as I said before, for format, I would keep it very simple. But if you're applying for a graphic design job, then perhaps that is when you need to flourish. Similarly for you, if storytelling is part of what you do, and the role that you're seeking to apply for is as creative, as aesthetic, and as rawly passionate, then putting those characteristics forward is appropriate. So I said at the very beginning, it's down to judgment, right? We need to make a judgment call about what goes in. So your judgment here is key. And judgment is about context. So what you've painted for me now is a very different context. And you will need to choose what's appropriate for your context. So for example, if you were applying to be a research assistant for a literary professor at a university, I would still say that a traditional mode would still be serving you. If you were going to present yourself at a poetry slam, obviously this is utterly irrelevant and would get you laughed out, No poetry slam place wants to hear in this mode. You could do a parody maybe, and this kind of ironically, but that would be it. So I would say it's very much fit for purpose, but you can still use your skills and your passion for a job within a university, like a research assistant position or a junior lecturer position, that would in fact require still some degree of formality and tradition, yes. Please, anyone else, and any kind of question. Yes, please.
So I wanted to ask about organizing the CV
Mm-hmm.
that you mentioned, the descending order.
Yep.
Instead of that, what I've done in my current CV is I've organized it according to the kinds of roles I've been into.
Sure.
It's a wide area.
Yeah.
So I've done it according 3 phases, like media, NGOs, and policy research.
Okay.
So is that a better way, or I should still follow like a descending order?
So it's a good question, and as I said, there's a wealth of knowledge also on the internet. So if you look up any CV builder, it will tell you basic blocks of what you need. In my view, what you've asked me is what I've done here. Okay, so in the beginning, I think it's important, as I said before, so what I've got here is qualities, followed by a summary of skills and achievements. So in these summary of skills, I've put down public speaking, which I'm doing right now. I've put down maintain networks and influence for strategic outcomes. I've put down stakeholder management, build consensus across countries. None of this is in any time sequence, right? These are just the skills. And then I've put a description of my work experience related to that skill. So that's not in any kind of sequence. But a CV must have some record. It's basically a record of your work experience. So I think what you should do is summarize your skill set. So as you said, you've got your 3 different areas. That should be up front if you want to showcase all 3. If you're going for a job that really focuses on one, your specific CV should heavily prioritize that one, and the other 2 would fall more into the background. Just twisting it for whichever it is that you're applying for. But then, yeah, all of it should have this descending sequence accompanying it at the back. And sorry, the reason for that is you're not the only person applying for the job normally, right? Sometimes there'll be a stack of 50, sometimes there'll be a stack of 500. Sometimes there'll be a person in HR going through your CV. Sometimes it will be a machine just going through. So if you don't have a specific format that sort of allows people to understand organizationally, this is what I'm communicating, this is where it fits, this is the format, you might actually lose the interviewer. So the difficulty thing of CVs as well, in my experience, is you have the specialist applying for the job. So the specialist could be someone involved in storytelling and poetry. That could be the specialist. But the person who first gets your CV is HR, who knows nothing about poetry. You know, the person in human resources is just like, were they employed in the last 6 months? Yes. You know, have they had minimum 2 years experience? Yes. Okay, they've already made the first cut. That's it. So the specialist stuff won't even get to the person until maybe the third process. And you really want to make sure you get that interview. Next, anybody? Yeah.
Since the world is becoming increasingly audiovisual,
Mm-hmm.
are there new ways like people make show reels or like a video resume? How often that is considered to be another differentiating element, or will that make us stand apart from the text-heavy series?
So again, I think that's a really good question, and it was one that was occurring to me as well, that in this ever-changing world, and as we start to talk about ICT and all sorts of technology advancements, how are we still writing CVs from 100 years ago? And yet, I think we still are. What's changing is the tools that we have to build them. And I think there's been an arc. I think we started kind of simple. We moved to, you know, trying to communicate too much, both in terms of content and then also visually. And then there's been a really big return back to simplicity. So keeping something short, clear, and easily readable. Now, as I said for 2 others in the room, it depends on what you're applying for. So obviously, if you're an actor or you're an architect or you're an interior or graphic designer, a show reel is essential because you need to show what you've done, right? So if graphic design is part of what you're doing or architectural buildings of what you've done, you need to be able to demonstrate that graphically. But for most roles that require, say, a desk-based engagement, it's more helpful to stick to a simple 2-pager. So I would say augment for the role that you're going for. So a job description, that phrase, usually means the job that is being advertised. No, I understand. So this is the summary of the jobs I've done, and it basically highlights what Syed has said. So this is your specific CV, right? What you're trying to do is communicate your job experience in a way that is relevant to the employer. So what you need to do is tease out a thing that you have done that will be relevant to that new job. Okay, and so as Syed says, figures might be appropriate. What is always important is outcomes. So often this is a huge mistake, and it's one worth listening to. A huge mistake in inexperienced CVs is people will either just put their job title, I was here. Well, that tells the employer nothing. You need a little bit more substance, so this is a great question. The next thing you need to say is what I did, but the what I did also doesn't say very much. So I say I attended negotiations on behalf of the Australian government. Okay, well, what happened? Did it go well? So I need to say, and the result was X. You know? So always you should put where you were, what you did, and what the outcome was because of what you did. So if you can also relate it back to due to my, and this is where you include a skill. So due to my advocacy, my ability to reach a number of people, I was able to convince X to do blah, and the result was whatever. Or due to my negotiation skills, due to my integrity, if it was something to do with your authenticity or honesty. But basically it's what you did, your special skill, and because of your skill, the outcome that was reached. So whatever example you choose, it should look like the outcome only happened because of you. It's something special to you that outcome happened. So it could be due to my emotional intelligence, or my ability to read people, or my ability to intuit, or storytell, or connect to a variety of audiences, irrespective of age or creed or background. You know, this is the bit that is special to you. Excellent question. Others? Yeah.
Hi, ma'am. Ma'am, so my question is, what exactly should be there in the cover letter? You just taught us how to make a proper CV or am I audible?
Yes.
So you just taught us how to make a proper CV, what all should be there, and what are the steps to building a very beautiful CV. So ma'am, I'm a fresher. I've never really had any kind of work experience. I would like to know what exactly should be there in the cover letter, and is it absolutely necessary for us to send a cover letter every time we apply for the job position?
So again, these are good questions, and I think it's context specific. Basically, if there are two ways in which you might apply for a job as a fresher. One would be there's a job advertised and you're responding to that. If you're responding to an advertised job, then generally that advertised job will tell you what they want. And yeah, you need to be able to, in addition to a CV, have a document that is answering the questions of that advertisement. If you're maybe spamming companies, and some people do this, they think, well, I'm just out and I really want to work in this place and I know they have interns, or they might take an intern. There's no advertised position, but I really want them to take me as an intern. All the more reason to have a cover letter. If you're a company or a business, and this is where you need to flip it in that way that Syed put the parking lot there. Right? Don't think about, oh, from my perspective, I'm so tired, I'm going for about 60 jobs, I can't do a specific thing for each one, I'm just going to mail my CV. That's one approach, but you need to think about the person receiving. And if all you have is a blank CV and you kind of don't know for what position or why, and then one person has said, you know, dear Ms. Spisbah, I was so excited to read about this opening at the Australia-India Institute because I'm passionate about Australia. In my degree, I did, you know, two essays on Australia-India connectivity in the Indo-Pacific because this is a really strong interest of mine. I see this bilateral relationship as critical for such and such. You're already telling me you're so passionate to work here, you've done that extra bit of homework, you have that extra bit of experience, and I'm already connecting to the person who wrote this because they're making the effort to connect to me. Right? If I just had a generic CV, it's, well, that's another one for the pile. You know, like, think about it that way. Yes, please.
As of now, we all are at initial stage and we just start a career from somewhere, and we all very aware about to do the internship. So as of now, we don't have that much of experience to showcase on our CVs.
Yeah.
What are the things we have to do on the CV to make it impactful?
Okay. So I'm going to tell you guys a personal experience of mine. And I was lucky that it worked out. I don't necessarily think everyone should do this, but this is what I did. So my very first job was in a top 5 law firm in Australia. So top 5 in the country. And when I went for the interview, these are very competitive jobs, and most people try and get the job based on their grades, you know, having one of the highest levels of grades or whatever. I went in and I spoke about my experience at KFC. So in Australia, it's very normal to have a part-time job that's not related to your field of work, to have extra money and also to gain some work experience. And I chose, my mum didn't want me to, she wanted me just to study, but I looked up the legislation and I worked out that I could legally work at the age of 14 and 9 months. And so at the age of 14 and 6 months, I started sending little CVs to anyone that would employ teenagers and got myself an after work school job. And my mum thought this was absolutely crazy and said, please just focus on your studies. And I said, well, if my studies fall, then we can talk. Otherwise, this is what I'm doing. And I worked for KFC for 3 years. When I got to my job interview in the law firm, and they said, why are you the best person for this job? I said, well, I'd like to speak about my experience at KFC. This I did not put on my CV though, because that obviously is not going to get me the job. But when you're in the room, this is when you can differentiate yourself. And I said, look, in my view, being in a law firm is all about service delivery with your client as the focus. So if I got the top grades of in law school. I can show you that I got the top grades, but what you want is someone who can really respond to client need. And KFC is one of the most global franchises in the world. Their brand is key. So hygiene, service delivery, how food is presented, everything is about how you're protecting the brand, promoting the brand, and servicing the client in a way that maintains quality. In my view, in a law firm, the role is similar. How I present information, how I package that information, timeliness of delivery, communicating with respect to the client, all of this is a holistic package. And I understand service delivery, and I understand the importance of the brand of this law firm, and I will service that, in addition to good grades and all of that. Your question is more about the CV itself. For the CV, you have to start from somewhere, but the jobs you'll be applying for will be commensurate with where you're at, right? So you're not going to be applying for a job that requires 25 years of experience if you've got 1 year of experience. So your CV will be appropriate for someone who's just starting. What you need to do is reflect on what you have. So if you've won any awards during university, definitely have a point that talks about the award you won. And if you won that award because of a passion you have for that particular award-winning skill, if that skill is relevant to the job, actually mention it as a sentence. You know, due to my commitment and dedication, or due to my creativity and the way I stood out from the pack, I received this award. If you don't have an award, but your teachers speak highly of you, you can even mention that. You know, my professors continuously highlight that my presentations or my essays are consistently of a high standard, and then use that person as a reference so that can be checked. And this is why I said reputation and reference is key, because sometimes if you don't have enough content, what you'll need is someone who can endorse you. And so maybe you find a really strong name. So a professor who's very well known in their field, quite famous in their field, might be willing to speak on your behalf. So that will help you stand out too. So you might not know people, but people might know who you know. And that's a really important thing as well. And as I said, put your skills up front. So even if you've not done anything yet, you can say, I have the ability to acquire knowledge quickly. So that little 15 words activity that we did at the beginning, if you retained all 15, maybe your skill is I acquire knowledge quickly. I'm able to absorb, think fast, and learn quickly on the job. And maybe you can point to 2 experiences that show that, because you need to always demonstrate what you say you can do. So I have the ability to acquire knowledge quickly, for example, and then name 2 things you've done that show that you've acquired knowledge quickly. And don't say a quiz of 15 words in a class, because that's probably not as impressive. I'm sure you have other examples. For those of you who only got 5 of the 15 words, that's actually not bad either, right? So what you might say is not ability to memorize or acquire quickly, because that's a memory test. If you got 5 words, you could say ability to distill relevant information, right? So the only ones you might have retained are MASCOM and memes, because you're really focused in on communication. So obviously party you didn't retain, because why on earth would you care about parties? You're all about the memes and MASCOM. So, you know, ability to distill information, analyze, think critically. These are really important skills as well. So we don't always need to all have the same skill set either. What makes you unique is your take on something, or your ability to do that. Okay, I think we have time for a couple more questions, please.
Yeah, so there is a job description that requires around 7 key skills, but I'm good at only 4 of them, and beginner at 3 of them.
Yeah.
So should I mention all of them in my CV? So that's my question. Should I mention my levels in those skills?
So that's a really good question. It's important because I'm no fan of lying. I don't think anyone should lie on a CV. I don't think there's any point to that. However, you don't want to be so painfully honest that you cut yourself out of the market. So again, it's a judgment test, right? If you've got 4, you play up those 4 and you demonstrate your strengths to the very height that you can. The other 3 may feature somewhere in your CV, but now you're sort of talking about criteria. To me, that's a separate document. So your CV should definitely demonstrate why you're excellent at the 4 you're excellent at. And then you would never say you're not good at something in your CV. What you can do is have an area, and I don't know, there's an area that talks about skills. And so, for example, in languages, people often do this, or in computer coding, people often do this. They say proficient or fluent in XYZ, beginner at ABC. And that's appropriate. So if you've just started in something and you've got, say, beginner Hindi, like me, you can say beginner. And that demonstrates you've got enough commitment to have started a skill in a certain area. And you might say beginner at blah, but the ability to acquire knowledge quickly. Or achieved level 1 in this. The other thing you guys might do, and I think this is a good thing to do as well, depending on where you are in your studies and your career progression, you might want a job not right now, but in a year from now, or in a year and a half from now. But it might be worth starting to look up the jobs you want to do and think about the skills you need. So if you know, I really want to apply for the UN, or I really want to do IAS officer, or I really want to be a poet, maybe I need to have published first. Maybe I need to have gone for some local competitions and then demonstrate, well, I've participated in 3 competitions in Delhi and I've gone to the Jaipur Literature Festival and I was, selected to speak at blah. But if the job you're applying for is next week, you won't have time to build up that background. But knowing that's where you want to be, you have 6 months or a year to kind of acquire that. If you have your dream job, but all you're missing is a key skill that you can get online with a micro-credential, maybe you're just going to do that 6-week credential, and then when you apply, you'll have that. So sometimes even when I was 25, I would think, well, what requires 10 years of experience and where do I want to be one day? And then you just start sort of thinking about that, and maybe you'll choose to do a master's or something based on where you want to be. And maybe extra learning isn't required, it's extra experience. Anybody else? Yep.
Ma'am, I just wanted to how should we handle employment gaps? Like, for example, should we mention that in a CV if we are continuously working for 2 years and we decide to give a break?
Yep.
So we should mention that, or?
So again, it's a really good question. As I said, I'm always a fan of honesty, but not such explicit honesty that will count you out. And I'll tell you my very first experience, because it is kind of funny. I first went for a job at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade as a graduate. And this is kind of embarrassing, but I'm a painfully honest person. And I was applying as someone who was 6 months short of graduating, like all graduates. But there was a field that says graduate degree. And so I put none because I hadn't yet graduated. So of course I didn't get an interview. I didn't get any job because I should have put law because that's what I was graduating in. But I didn't. I thought, well, I'm 2 months shy of graduation, so I haven't graduated, so I don't have any degree. Stupid. We don't want to do that. Okay? For an employment gap, I personally on a CV, I'd never lie. But where I've had, back-to-back experiences, have I got it up here? So here I've gone for year to year. So you'll see some things I've put January to December, so that shows I was employed the whole year in Moscow in Russia. But for other jobs, you might just say from 2016 to 2018. And it could be that I stopped working in June 2018 and I took my new job in January 2019, but it won't be clear on my CV. Okay? So I took 2 lots of 3-month breaks and went traveling in the last 4 years. But you don't see this on my CV. If somebody asks me at an interview, for sure I will tell them. But here, I don't think you need to communicate breaks. Unless it's a huge break, like a 2-year break, then of course that will be obvious. But if you've taken 6 months off or even 8 months off, you can just say employed from, 2018 to 2020. We're in 2020 now. Pretend you lose your job today and you don't take a new job till 2021. Well, you were employed till 2020. Then in 2021, you have a new job. And then in the interview, that's when you should say, I took out some personal time to do a yoga course, or I was taking care of family for whatever reason, either an elder in my family or a junior, a baby, like it doesn't matter. There's always a reason you would have taken time out. I think it's important to explain in person, but I think a document should look tight, consistent, and fit for the job. Yeah. Okay, and then yeah, go on. No, sorry. While you've got the floor, follow up.
Okay, so ma'am, basically I have discussed it with everyone. Like my resume is too long and wordy.
Mm-hmm.
So like, how do I cut down efficiently? Like I would like to take on views. Like how should I cut it down? Because I've been working with the same organization for exactly 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I have not that much experience, but I have a lot of experience in that organization, and due to that, my resume is being too wordy. And so how should I cut down? Like.
So I think you need to find a mentor and someone who will read what you've done. But often we get into the mistake of thinking more is more, when almost always less is more in any part of your life. Accessories, anything. Less is generally more. If you've got a more is more situation, there'll always be a way to cut it down. My personal experience is when I write something without the time to review it, it's always too long. So whatever you write, whether it's a job description or even an essay, try and write something and give yourself a week at least to come back to it, because it's really hard to be your own editor. Normally you need distance from your piece, and when you come back you can edit. If you don't have time to do that, find someone else who will edit for you, and be willing to listen. Ego is also a huge problem, right? Don't get attached to each word as if it were your child. It's okay to say, all right, that was my masterpiece. I can still keep it as version A, but version C might be a quarter of what you wrote originally. And those words can be used for something else maybe, or they die their own little death, and that's okay. If you've had one job for 2 years, that does not need to be more than 2 pages. It may not even be 1 page. What you would need to do is cut that down into what have you been doing. So can I just ask you, what is your job?
Basically, I'm a social worker in an NGO.
Social worker in an NGO, okay. What kind of social work?
I look after the adoption programs.
Adoption programs? Okay, so you're doing program management.
Yeah.
So that's one heading with 3 or 4 dot points. So you've got program management, you maybe do people management, you maybe in your program management do project management, you might have some time management skills, organizational skills, people management skills, and adherence to deadlines, and there's a number of skills you should be highlighting as dot points under program management, and that's it. That's probably 5 lines max. Then you could write 1 line about why that's rewarding if you want to continue in that role. This work is rewarding for me because I'm able to assist families and children to be placed in homes, which has a big impact both for the individuals concerned and for society as a whole. And then that tells me who you are and that you're a compassionate person, as well as having that strict program management skill set. That's really tight. Yeah? Please.
Ma'am, is there a difference between resume and curriculum material?
No.
Because I've seen like you have the leverage of 1.5 page for resume, but if you are writing a CV, it can be from 3 to 5 pages.
I would say they're used interchangeably. It's splitting hairs to try and differentiate between a resume and a CV. Basically, if someone asks for your CV, they're asking for one and the same document, and we should be sticking to a 2-ish page, to a 2-ish page focus. Yeah.
Ma'am, if you are recruiting.
If I'm sorry?
If you are the recruiter.
Recruiting, yep.
And a candidate comes to you and says that I have a gap year.
Yep.
So, how do you look at this?
So this is a very different question because I'm not all employers, right? So I think this depends on the employer in general. my personal view is anyone who undertakes a gap year is doing an incredibly important thing for themselves and their own personal development. And if I personally was interviewing someone who's done a gap year, I would think that they have improved their sense of wisdom. They're probably more mature than someone who hasn't done a gap year. They've got life experience, because generally, in Australia anyway, people who have done gap years generally travel, which means you've traveled on your own, you've been away from family, you've had to manage a budget, you've had to find accommodation, you've had to stay in God knows where, which means you're probably a bit more flexible person as well. You've probably had a bit more cultural experience. So in Australia we can stick in our box, but if we've travelled to Thailand or to Europe or to India or to the United States or to South America, you're getting that cultural experience that many 21-year-olds don't have. So in my personal view, having gone out into the world and taken time out of a rigid learning environment, I mean, let's face it, we're all institutionalized in one way or another, whether it's by education or whether it's by our career institution. So if you've freed yourself from education or career and had a 6 months or a year of independence, just living and connecting to this planet, great. And I would talk it up as such. Anybody else? I think we're getting to the close of the time. So if there's one last question, I'm happy to answer it. Otherwise, okay, one last one.
It's just a personal question for me. It's
Sure.
to my personal life. I was pursuing MBBS from Haldwani Government College, but due to some reason, I have to drop out that.
Okay.
And after completing 2 years in bachelor's in MBBS, and I was not in that state, so I had to opt for another profession at the same time. So I just spent my approx 1 year at home. At the same time, I was doing job in teleperformance and 3 months in concentrics. Then I just make my mind to retrace my path. Then I took admission in mass communication in GT Goenka. But the thing is, there is a lot of gap between my 12th, because I completed my 12th in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And I took admission in bachelor's in mass communication in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
There is a gap of 3 years. So how can I manage this gap? Should I have to tell the interviewer about these things I have to mention, or how can I overcome with this?
So listening to you, it's very touching. So I'm glad you raised this, because I think I've heard about gap years and there's a gap in my CV from a number of questions now. And it's paining my heart a little bit, because it's making me realize just how competitive the environment is that you're operating in. But please raise your hand if any of you are above 25. Yeah. Anyone above 25? None of you. So you're all so incredibly young. A gap year or a gap in your CV at this age is not at all significant, I promise you. I think if you were 35 and you didn't work for 5 years, maybe you need to explain that. I think any gap of 12 months or less is completely explainable and not worth worrying about. And if you're under 25, you're basically just in your formative educational years, right? So how long it took you, whether it was 1 or 2 years more or less, is completely immaterial. I wouldn't feel the need to explain that. I wouldn't even have it on my heart or head as something to worry about. And this is the other important thing that I want to teach you as a soft skill before we close, because we've just spoken about writing, which was my job today. But soft skills are really important. And how we communicate and the energy that we communicate, it resonates in a room. So if you walk in and you have a really strong CV, but you're thinking, oh God, they're going to find out about that 3-month gap, they're going to feel that. They're going to think, well, something's missing or something's not being explained. There's going to be a trust deficit if what you communicate in writing and what you communicate with your energy aren't consistent, right? So I think you just need to make peace with whatever experience you had or you made. It's completely fine. If you had to change for personal reasons and you're doing something else now, that's okay. If you started for 2 years in something else, what you can say is, listen, I have 2 years of education already in this parallel field, which has given me insight and interdisciplinary skills now in mass communications. So unlike anyone else who just has a mass comm degree, I actually have 2 years of this other cross-disciplinary skill set that I bring to the picture. I have something extra. I don't have something less. Do you understand? It's actually fantastic. I think the more cross-disciplinary experience we have, the more we can bring different perspectives. So try and always look at your background as something that you're proud of in hindsight, because whatever story that got us to where we are, and maybe it's personal illness, maybe it's an illness in the family, maybe we just couldn't cope, maybe we got really stressed or depressed. This all forms who we are, and whatever little chip on our armor or something we think makes us weak, it actually makes us strong, because it makes us more compassionate, more understanding, more human, more wise, more connected. And it allows us to connect with other people in the workplace. So every part of your story is important. The only thing you have to do is make peace with it and make it part of your positive story. You know, a friend of mine burped once when he was speaking, and I was like, that's disgusting. And he's like, nope, that's my superpower. And I was like, okay, call it what you want, but you've really made peace with something and you've made it your own. I think we just need to stand up tall and be happy with who we are and what we have, and then tell a good story around that. Yeah? It's a really good one to end on, so thank you. Soft skills are key. Thanks.